Yes, sir.
Yeah, got it. So let me just share my screen. All right. This is what we're going to look at. We're going to talk about next is something called as the Windows Communication Foundation, or WCF. Okay. It's the first topic that we're going to be talking about. So essentially, what is WCF all about? WCF is basically how two applications can share data. So how, if you've got two separate applications running, how can we communicate with each other? How do these two applications talk to each other and work with each other? Now, before we get into the how of WCF, it's, we need to understand a little bit of history behind this. So if you had two applications talking to each other, okay, there were different mechanisms that were available for them to talk to each other. One of the mechanisms was using something called as a web service. Right? Now, a web service, as the name suggests, is essentially run on the web, using certain protocols, and allows two applications to talk to each other using a combination of three major sort of protocols. So what you have here is, firstly, the data that you are passing. This would be in XML format. Okay, so whatever data that you want to exchange between two applications would be in XML format. The envelope for that data is using a SOAP envelope. All right. So what do I mean by the envelope? Envelope actually, if you want to write a letter to someone, right? You don't just write the letter and put that page in the mailbox. What do you do with that letter? Typically, if you want to send some data along with this, you put an envelope around it. And on the envelope, you would address to whom the letter is addressed. Put the address maybe out there, put the stamps, requisite stamps, and so on and so forth. So similarly, if you're sending some data, details about that data, for whom is the data intended? What method are you calling maybe on the service, for example, right? What are the parameters that you're sending out there? All of these details would be put onto the envelope out here. And the envelope would be a SOAP envelope. So you've seen an example of a SOAP message. When we did serialization, so you saw how SOAP message looked like. And that had a certain format. So that is how your data would be actually addressed using SOAP and transferred over HT. So these are the three key, sort of main options while working with a web service. Now, what could be a service? Service is basically something that's running on the net that you could actually be calling. Now, this can be used in different scenarios. Let's say you've got two software. One is, let's say, an inventory control software, and one is, let's say, a sales order processing system. So inventory control keeps track of how many items you actually have with you right now. And the sales order processing system is, selling products, or any sale that has been made is registered in the sales order processing system. Now let's assume these were two different applications. Maybe one created in Java, one created in .NET. Now they want to talk to each other. So one option available here is, as I said, using a web service. If you look at the protocols that the web service is using, all three protocols are standardized protocols. So XML SOAP and HTTP, all three of them are not specific to, let's say, Microsoft, or not specific to, let's say, Java, or not specific to, let's say, PHP. These are standardized W3C protocols, and the web service itself, which uses these protocols, that also is a W3C protocol. So typically, if you had to use, or if you have to communicate between these two applications, the web service would be a standard way of doing so, because different applications can now talk to each other using a web service, right? Different types of applications can work with it. So this was one of the most popular options that was available to you out. Okay. So one example I gave you is something like two separate systems talking to each other. Another possibility that you can think of is, let's say an application is giving out data and your application is consuming it. Let's say you're trying to book a movie ticket, right? So what site do you generally use? Sometimes, most of the times, Book My Show, right? So what is Book My Show doing? Book My Show is actually getting in details from different movie theaters and showing you a consolidated place where you can actually book that ticket. So some theater, let's say whatever, let's say for example IMAX, is giving out information to Book My Show, saying that these are the tickets that I have. Book My Show is getting these details, showing it on their website, and if a booking is made, it is then going and updating it to IMAX. So IMAX could be running a service which is, allowing Book My Show to firstly find out what are the available seats, available theater timings, dates, and so on and so forth, and then actually make a booking out. Right? So that's what typically your web services would allow you to do. Now, besides web services, there were other protocols that were available out here. For example, if you're working in .NET, and we have not seen this, .NET allows you to exchange data between two .NET applications using remoting. And remoting here, again, could use either TCP/IP or it could use HTTP to exchange data. But this would be now what? This would be not, .NET to Java, for example. This is specifically what? .NET to .NET, right? Remoting the technology. Have you all done, what do you say? Or RMI call in Java? Have you all learned about an RMI call, remote method invocation in Java?
No, sir. No, sir.
Okay, so it's very difficult to then explain. So let me just say that an RMI call in Java would be similar to remoting in .NET. Okay, I was trying to give you that example, but if you have not learned that, forget about it. Essentially, allowing two applications to talk to each other, but the prerequisite now in remoting is what? That this has to be a .NET application. Another way of working with this, before .NET, there was COM. COM then gave rise to something called COM or distributed COM. Then came something called COM plus. Right? So all of these were pre-.NET technologies. Now this COM plus, when it came to .NET, it was called as enterprise services. In .NET, this COM plus was rechristened, was renamed as enterprise services. Again, what are these? What are all these technologies? Just different ways for two applications to talk to each other. And this enterprise services, right, had two sub options there, something called as MSMQ and something called as transaction server. Right? These are the two sort of main sub options under enterprise services. So what is MSMQ? MSMQ here stands for Microsoft Message Queue. Right? So where would you need to use this sort of a message queue in your application? If you have a situation where there is a fast sender and a slow receiver. So supposing now, for example, let's assume, I'm just giving you an example. Let's assume all of you all start asking me questions. I said, do you have any queries or questions? And you all start asking me questions. Right? Now, the speed at which all of you are asking me questions is faster than what I can reply to you. Now, how do I handle that? Maybe I can ask you, why don't you all put down your question in the chat window? And the chat window now becomes something like a source of a queue. So I can then see what messages come in first. And I can start off by answering those questions. So one by one, I go on that. So you have finished sending the question, but I am now responding slower. So if you had that situation, again, two applications talking to each other, you could have used MSMQ, which is part of Com+ earlier and now called enterprise services when used in .NET. Then we had something called as transactional services. So earlier it used to be called MTS, Microsoft Transaction Server. And this allowed, if you're trying to call code on two different applications, let's say I'm calling code on two applications. How can I make two different applications, not one application, two different applications participate together into one transaction? Right? For example, let's say there is an, bank transfer. I keep giving this example, taking place. So my bank is, let's say, ICICI Bank. All right. And let's say Kaustubh's bank is whatever, HDFC Bank. Right. So now I want to call code which says debit ICICI Bank and credit, or we'll do it the other way around, debit HDFC Bank and credit ICICI Bank. I want to get the money. So many questions of his I have answered. He better pay me for that. Now, while doing one of the operations, if it fails, now both of these are not running on the same server. These are two separate applications that are running. So how do you make two applications participate together in one transaction? These MTS or Microsoft Transaction Servers or using transactions was the option out. So all of these are fairly, little advanced options that you could be setting out. All right. Web services was a protocol that was created, in fact, by Microsoft only. Microsoft only proposed web services. And then it was accepted by W3C, Worldwide Web Consortium, and made a standard. Then Microsoft came up with more options, something called as web service enhancements, or WSE. Okay, which is again using these same things, using the same, it's like an advanced version of web services, but adding features to web services. Like, for example, what if I want to add transactions to web services? What if I want to add, what are known as duplex web services? Now, these were non-standardized features. Some of them required, for example, certain extra additional software. Now, these were not ratified by W3C. These were not accepted as a standard by W3C, because if it has to be accepted as a standard, the protocols that you're using should be standardized protocols. So some of these protocols were not standardized protocols. But Microsoft still had WSE. So between Microsoft applications, if they had to talk to each other, they could use some of these advanced features that were not available in the basic web services. So there were a variety of different types of applications available, each of which did one basic thing. And what is that one basic thing that we are talking about? Let one application talk to the other. How can one application communicate to the other? And using all these different techniques, all these different options that they were there. Now the problem was that for all of these, the libraries that you use, the syntaxes that you use, the code that you use was entirely different, totally different, right? Totally different meaning what? If you, I'll give you an example. If you use the web service, now web service also, for example, can transfer data over HTTP, and remoting also can transfer data over HTTP. So in that sense, they're similar. But if you try looking at the code, you have no clue what is happening when you're doing remoting if you have done web service. Entirely different libraries, entirely different code. So .NET looked at these different options and they said, you know what, let us create a way in which we can standardize communications between two applications and put all these different technologies under one umbrella. And that is what WCF is all about. What WCF allows you to do is, instead of having these variety of different technologies doing different things to write code in a different way, it says we will use all of these together into one single standardized way of working. Are we clear on this, everybody? So the code that you start writing now, whether you're using, let's say, WSE, or whether you're using web services, or whether you're using remoting, the code starts looking the same now. That's what WCF is offering. The Windows Communication Foundation is like an umbrella over the different methods of communication between two applications. Now, what does this WCF use? What are the basics of WCF? WCF uses some of the fundas of software as a service. That's the primary sort of design pattern that it's using out here. So what are you saying? You're saying that if somebody had to use your application, use your service, for example, then the way of communicating with that application should not be tied to what the application does. So the application might be doing a certain thing. So that is one aspect out there. And now you should be allowed to communicate with this application in different ways. All right? And isolate these different layers. Say that one is the business logic that you're doing. Second is how you are now communicating with this. That is what they're trying to do. So what would that help us? The business logic that you're writing for all these different things will remain similar. Only what would change would be the protocols that you're using for communication with them. So the starting point in WCF is you start off by creating a service. You say that I'm going to create a service. Now this service may be consumed by different people in different ways. All right? A service can be available at multiple what are known as endpoints. Right? So we start off in WCF by creating a service. A service is available at multiple endpoints. Right? And every endpoint is a combination of something called as an A, B, and a C. Every endpoint is available at a combination of an A, B, and a C, where A stands for address, B stands for binding, and C stands for contract. And these are typically called the ABCs of WCF. So address asks the question, where is the service available? Address asks the question, where is the service available? Binding asks the questions, how is the service available? And contract asks the question, what is available in the service? An address, binding, and a contract. All right. I'll give you an example. Right. I'll give you an example. One of the things I used to do if I went to Kharghar CDAC was sometimes I would go to this Kharghar McDonald's. Just before the expressway begins, there's a McDonald's out there. I quite like it there. So let's assume that McDonald's is the one that's giving you the service. Okay. Now, how can I get this service from McDonald's? What are the different ways in which I can get the service from McDonald's? One possibility is I go to McDonald's, I sit inside, all right, and I go to the counter, serve myself, sit inside, and I eat out there only. That is one possibility. Second possibility is, if I don't have the time for doing that, I call them up and I say, I am at CDAC Kharghar. Please send me this option of whatever I want to order. They say, what about the payment for that? I said, no, the students will take care of it. So anyway, so the second option that I can have is what? I can have it delivered to where I am. Now there's a third option, right? If I'm in a vehicle, if I'm driving down, so I can actually, they have a drive-through. They have a drive-through. So you can actually go in from one end, you place your order at one point and you make the payment there, and you're actually sitting in your car. By the time you go around to the the other side, by the time you drive your car to the other corner of the building, your order is mostly ready and you can just pick it up and drive on. So right now, what is the service that is being provided? Who's providing the service? McDonald's. McDonald's is providing the service at 3 endpoints. What are the 3 endpoints? What are the 3 endpoints? First possibility was what? I go to McDonald's and I sit there and I enjoy their whatever burgers and shakes and whatever else that I like. Second possibility. Second possibility, what do you do? What can I do?
At our place.
At our place. So I get it home delivered. Third possibility, drive-through. All right. Now let's discuss the ABCs of each of these. So if I go and sit in McDonald's, that is one endpoint of McDonald's. That is one endpoint of McDonald's. Endpoint is a place where the service is available. So if I'm sitting in there, what is the address? Where am I getting the service?
Right there in McDonald's.
In McDonald's itself. Binding. How am I getting the service? How am I getting the food? Yes. It's actually a self-service. I have to go up, walk up to the counter, pay at the counter, and pick it up and bring it out here to wherever I'm sitting. So that's my how. Thirdly, contract. Contract is what is available in the service. So what here is the menu. So what are the options available in the service? What are the options available in the service? Everything that's there on the McDonald's menu, right? So that is what in there. So that was the first endpoint. Second endpoint was what? Second endpoint was at wherever location I am in. So if I'm sitting in CDAC Kharghar, address, where am I getting it? At my office or at my home or at my location? How am I getting that service?
So delivered.
Yeah, so there is a delivery guy who's bringing it over. I don't have to go and go to McDonald's. The delivery guy is getting it over. Thirdly, contract. What is available in the service? Now, will all the options that are there in McDonald's, or will they also be available in the delivery menu? No, the soft serves are sometimes not available. Ice cream is not available, right? Sadly. So I don't get to eat my ice cream cone because by the time that guy brings it over, it might melt. So contract now for the delivery menu is different from the contract for the dine-in menu. Are we getting this, everybody? All right. Third possibility, third thing that I could do at McDonald's was that I could drive in. So address is where can I take my car? Can I take my car inside where people are sitting? No. So where is that? That there is a specific gate that you go through and in the compound and you drive in. So you're actually placing an order there. Now, if I walk up there and I say I want something and this is what I want, they will not serve. The only people whom they serve are people who are traveling in a vehicle, in a car. So that's my address. First thing is different. Secondly, binding. How am I getting it? How am I getting it? I have to do what? I have to drive down there. And thirdly, contract. Now again, do I get all the options out there as what I get inside? No. Items that are going to take a long time to get prepared are not available. Why? Why? Supposing an item is going to take 15 minutes to be prepared. Why would it not be available in the drive-through?
So it will create a traffic.
Yeah, because there are cars waiting behind me. So they don't have those options on the menu. If you're going to take something which is going to take 15 minutes to be made, it's not there. So have you understood now what these combinations of? Essentially, you're consuming a service at different endpoints. I talked about the 3 endpoints in McDonald's. Address, binding, and contract combined to make one endpoint. Address, binding, and contract combined to make one endpoint. Are we clear on this? Now, if I have to apply the same logic to WCF, firstly, my service would be created. And I can now, supposing my service has 20 methods, I can make it available to different people at different endpoints. So for example, the address, the first question, address here in case of WCF would be the URL where it's available. All right. So for example, let's say Shiv Kumar could access it at a certain URL, Kaustubh could access it at a different URL. So the URL would specify in the A key what is the address. Binding are these different protocols that could be used. So for example, Kaustubh could consume my web service as a web service or could consume my service as a web service. So which would use HTTP. So if Kaustubh is a Java application, then, and if I'm a .NET application, then the only place where we can meet is in a web service. But if Shiv Kumar is a .NET application, then Shiv Kumar could consume a service as let's say TCP/IP using remoting, and that will be faster than working with HTTP. So the binding is what protocol that you want to use. Right? That's your protocol that you want to use. And lastly, the contract. When I say the word contract, when I use the word contract, what comes to your mind? What should come to your mind? When I say this is the contract, anywhere else that we use the word contract to describe something?
Versions.
Interface.
Interface. Well said. Who said that?
Anuj.
Anuj. Anuj, why can't I see you? Show me your face. No? So handsome. Show me why are you hiding? Talk to me. The last couple of days, at least now, show me your face. Okay. So well said. The contract is typically an interface. What does the interface contain? Contains methods. So supposing my service has 50 methods, but for accessing it, I'm accessing it only for certain options. So I can create interfaces that give me access to only those methods. Service will contain everything, but you can access it only through the interface that I would have allowed you. So this here typically is an interface that you would create. Right? And these are the things that you would use when creating a service. So we're going to create a service. We're going to create a WCF service. While creating a WCF service, what would we start off with? Start off with creating a service. So that will be all your code in there. And then expose it over an ABC. Expose it over an endpoint, which consists of what? Every endpoint would consist of what? An address binding and a contract. That will be my part for giving out the service. This is the person who's writing the service. The other person would be the consumer, would be consuming the service. Are we clear on this? All right. Now, once you create your service, you need a host for your service. So service is just the code that's running, but host is the one that's accepting a request and sending back a response. So you need to create a host for your service. The host for your service could either be something like a web server, like let's say IIS, for example. That could be one possible host. Or you could create your own host. So you could write code to create a host. And what will be the job of the host? What will be the job of the host? To receive a
request
and send back a
response.
response. Right? That's what the host would do. So either inbuilt host like IIS, for example, or alternatively, create your own host in code. Which do you think will be easier to do? Use an inbuilt host or create your own host in code?
Inbuilt one?
Inbuilt ones should be easier, right? Which is why we're going to take up the second option. And we will create our own hosts while creating a service. So in addition to creating my service, I'm also going to create a host for my service. Now, why am I torturing you? You all have been through a long day. You all have, given an exam. You all have, given a lab exam. You're probably kept up most of the night. So why am I torturing you this way? And why don't I just give you the easier option? Because when I give you the tougher option, you have to do everything on your own. And when you do everything on your own, you will understand clearly what is happening in the WCF service. When you use an inbuilt host, most of the implementation details are hidden from you. So you will have no clue what is happening out there. All right. So we're going to go with it the tougher way. So the code will look a little more cryptic, will look a little more daunting. But hopefully by the end of the code, you will have understood what a WCF service is. All right. Okay. So I have some code that I have already created. These are the different projects that I have out there in WCF. So the different projects that I have out there, and we will go through some of them. We will not go through all of them. There are a lot of them. We'll go through some of them. While creating this, you need to run Visual Studio as an administrator. So I'm going to run Visual Studio as an administrator and open my WCF project. Okay. So I already have some code written down and I'm going to open that code. The first thing that you need to do here. Okay, by the way, WCF works only on .NET framework, doesn't work on .NET Core. Okay, so it has to be a .NET Core, .NET framework application that you're working. The first thing that I'm going to do here is I'm going to add a reference to system.service model. So make note of these things. These are, in this library, most of the code for your WCF applications is there. So add a reference for system.service model. All right. The application that I've gone in for can be any type of application, can be any type, but I have gone for a console app. So my console app, the one is going to be the host, and then I'll have a client connecting to my service. What am I essentially going to do in my service? What are we trying to do at the end of this all? We're going to have two applications talk to each other. That's all that we're doing. So right now I'm creating the server application. The server application will receive a request, process it, and send back the data. And we'll create the client later. So I've gone in for a console app. I've added a reference to system.service model. And let's look at some of the code that we are creating. My start point is going to be an interface. My start point is going to be an interface. What is this interface marked out as? I've given an attribute of what? Of? Yes?
Service contract.
Service contract.
Service contract. So what is this in my ABC? This is what? This is the C of my ABC. This is the contract in my ABC. We said that every service is available at an endpoint. And every endpoint has three features. What is that? Address, binding, and contract. So this is the contract. What is this in McDonald's? What is this in McDonald's?
Menu.
That's the menu. That's the menu in McDonald's. What are the options that are available in McDonald's? So if I go to their main, this thing, I get a different menu. If I call them up, I get a different menu. If I drive through, I get a different menu. So I can have multiple service contracts. So I could do that. Right now, I'm not doing that. Right now, I'm having how many? Having only one. But you could create as many contracts as you want to, and those would have different methods in them. Okay. What is the next part of the code doing? Can you tell me what this part of the code is doing?
Implementation of code.
Sorry?
Implementing.
What have I created? All that I've done is I've created a class that implements that interface.
Yes.
So this here, hello service is my service. How many methods does it have? Whatever methods are given in my interface, it is supporting those methods. Could I have implemented more than one interface? Could my class have implemented more than one interface?
Yes.
Yes, right? So I could have done that. I'm not doing that. Right now, what is it? My McDonald's only come to my McDonald's and eat. That is the only service that I have right. So right now, these are the methods that I have. This, of course, returns a hello world. So there's no big deal out here. So my contract is complete. My service is complete. Okay. What next? I need to now host this service. To create a host for this service, this is what I'm doing. I am writing down the code in main, wherein I'm creating a service host. Right? I create a service host, and at the end of this code, somewhere, I have opened that host. So what has opened that host? What has happened now? McDonald's has opened its shutters. You can now walk in. This is now ready and running. It is now available to run. At some point later, I'm doing a read line. So if I press enter, what am I doing after that? Closing for the day. McDonald's is closing its shutters for the day. Are we clear on this, everybody? So this is what we are doing. We are creating a service host. Host.open would say now I can accept requests from anybody, and host.close will close that service. All right, now let's look at this. So let's go line by line. Service host is equal to new service host. What are the things it's asking you for? What are the things it's asking you for? Yeah. What are the first thing it's asking you for?
Type.
The type information. So now this is details about the service. So what is the name of my service? Same name of my service was hello service. So information about that service is being passed out here. The second parameter there is what is known as the base address of the service. See, where is it located? So McDonald's is located where? Located in Kharghar, on the highway, just before the expressway begins. On the left hand side it is located. So I'm giving the details about that service. Where is McDonald's located? So that is called as your base address. Now we'll see where the base address is used. What have I given as the base address right now is HTTP localhost : some port number, some available port number / the name of the service is, I'm calling it as hello service. This could have been called XYZ. There's no hard and fast rule that it has to be the same name as the class. Any name that you're giving can be given out there. So this is the base URL of where the service is. Let's try creating an endpoint. So host.add service endpoint. What does every endpoint ask you for? 3 things for the endpoint.
Address, binding, and contract.
Address, binding, and contract. So now look at the 3. They're actually doing it in the reverse way. This is the address. This is the address where the service is located. So supposing I had given the address here as, let's say, endpoint 1. I've given the address as endpoint 1. Then the service would be located at whatever is the base address, plus endpoint 1. What is the base address right now? Localhost 8000 hello service plus what is the endpoint address? What is the endpoint address?
Endpoint 1.
Endpoint 1. So this is where the service should be available. A for address. Where is it available? It is available at this URL. Are we getting it? So how does it map it? It says whatever is your base address, I will add the endpoint address to the end of it. Now, what if I don't give an endpoint address? Supposing I said only endpoint. What will this be now? Only endpoint. Supposing I don't give anything at all, then what will this be? Just this. So if you notice this, I'm saying that it is the service is available at the base address itself. So when would you need to create multiple endpoints? If you want to expose your service via multiple options, let's say there is a restaurant tomorrow that opens and says, I want only people to come in and eat out here. I will not even give home delivery. I will not even, I don't have place for a drive-in. So where is it available now? Only at the base address. So this is what I've done out here. So I've created only one endpoint. If I had to create multiple endpoints, then what will I need to do? I'll have to give each endpoint a different name. So endpoint 1, endpoint 2, endpoint 3, endpoint 4, and so on and so forth. So that's your address. What is the second thing that it's taking? What is the second thing that it's taking?
Basic
What is that?
HTTP binding. object.
Basic HTTP binding is the type of binding, is the protocol that you're using. Now, if you're going to be using web services, web services use basic HTTP binding. So how am I creating this service? I'm saying it's available here as a web service. Who can access my service? Which applications can access it? Can a Java application access it?
No.
Why not?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Why
sir.
not? Why not? Java application can also access it. Web services are available everywhere. Have you all created a web service in Java? I'm just asking. I don't know.
Yes, sir.
Yes. Have you also consumed one?
Yes, sir.
Yes or no? Consumed means, I'm asking seriously. Have you gone and created a client for that application? Yes or no? I'm asking. I don't know.
Probably
Have you
not, sir.
Okay. So if I'm saying, if you had created a consumer in Java, if you had created a client application in Java, that client application could have contacted my URL also and contacted the web service, because web services are available as a standardized mechanism. So I could have other applications contact me also. All right. Can I digress for a minute? Can I go completely off the record, off the track for a minute? Or would I lose you all? Okay. So with your permission, I'm going to take 5 minutes to talk about something else. This batch has not asked me that. Thankfully, they have not asked me that. But most of the other batches that I have worked with generally ask me, and especially more online batches, less in-person batches, more. Mostly ask me, sir, which project should I do? For my final project, which project should I do? And I said, what do you want to do? He says, I want to do a project which nobody else in the world has ever done before. That project I'm going to do, which should be so unique, that nobody in the world has thought about it. Okay. I said, then what do you plan to do with it? No, I'm just going to give it to CDAC. I said, if it's such a unique idea, then monetize it, make it an app, sell it outside. What are you doing out here? That is my responsibility. And my advice to everybody is that instead of trying to create something that nobody has ever created in their, even in their dreams before, instead of trying to do that, create something that showcases what technologies you know. So, for example, if you have learned certain advanced things, take a project which shows the person who's interviewing you or who's going to look at your project. See, in my project, I have used this feature. I have used this advanced feature out here. And this is how I will implement it. So rather than focus on the functionality, focus on the technology that is showcasing that functionality. That is my advice to you. and whatever technology you work with. Could be .NET, could be Java, whatever. So for example, if you're doing a .NET project, instead of creating 100 pages that do the same thing, create 10 pages that showcase 10 different things in your project. Right? So for example, now I just made a mention of this. Now you can create a web service here and you can call it from a Java application. So do that. No? If you're creating a Java project, create one small option in .NET. Tell the guy out there, I created a Java project that talked to a .NET application. The .NET application hosted it, or the other way around. Java hosted it. I created a .NET application that talked to a Java application. I use the service. I interacted with each other. So showcase skills, not functionality. Showcase how that project should be. How can you shine out there, saying that, you know, these are the technologies I have learned and these technologies I have implemented in this part of my project. So if you can do that, that would be pretty useful. So two of you all can do the same thing. But how two of you all are doing it differently will show me whom I want in my organization. All right. Now, I don't know the people from CDAC are listening in, but generally there's pressure from them saying that no, do something unique. So don't listen to what I said. Listen to what they are telling you. Okay, I just ramble on. I just, you know, say a few things sometimes, not very important. Anyway, coming back to where we were. So I diverted, went somewhere else and came back. I went to McDonald's and came back. We are using basic HTTP binding. Basic HTTP binding here is allowing me to create a web service. A web service can be contacted by other applications as well. Okay. So that was the first part of the address. Second part was the binding. The third part here, of course, is what? ABN. What is missing? C was the contract. So what is the contract? iService. This is your contract, which has been marked as a service contract. Now it's important that whatever methods you're marking need to be marked as an operation contract. So these are the methods that will be available through the service. The service itself needs to be marked as a service contract. Method needs to be marked as an operation contract. So these are the valid operations that are supported by the service. So now whenever he tries to access the service, these are the things that will be available out here. Are we clear on this? Only the options that are available in that interface would be available. So your class might have 50 methods, but if the interface has only 5 methods, what will the service give you at this endpoint? Only those 5 methods. So this is, I have added an endpoint. Have you understood this, everybody? Have you understood how we have added an endpoint? 3 things while creating an endpoint. An address is the URL where you want to access the service. Secondly is the binding. What protocol are you using? And thirdly, the contract, which says what are the methods that the service would provide out here for you. Clear on this, everybody? All right. Now, this code that we have written is good enough to run your service. Is good enough to run your service. So even if I don't write any of the other code, my service will run. How many endpoints is my service available at right now? Right now, available at how many endpoints?
1.
So this is good enough to do that. So don't even look at the other code, and my service is up and running. So all this simple: create a host, add an endpoint, and open the host. McDonald's now open, shutters are open. Okay. Now, let's try and understand one more concept. We have got a service that's running, and now you want to write a client for it. So now I'm not thinking about the service. I'm talking about the client. Now client will have to do what now? If the client has to send this, client has to do what now? It has to firstly create XML data. Then put a SOAP envelope on it. Send it over HTTP. Service will do something. It will return some values to it. The client has to now get those values. The values that have come back are now again in what format? The data is wrapped with SOAP. So the client has to do the reverse process. Receive it from the HTTP object, extract the SOAP, extract the XML, and get the value back. Which is a very painful process. Not easy to do. No? I showed you the SOAP message the other day. Will you be able to write a SOAP message on your own? I showed you in serialization, I showed you that SOAP message. I'll show you. If you all are not, if you all don't remember that, I'll show you the SOAP message that I had. I think it may still be there. So this is the SOAP message. This is the SOAP message. Can you write the SOAP message? Not that you cannot write it, but it is anything but simple. They themselves dropped the name. Earlier it used to be called Simple Object Access Protocol. They themselves said, no, we are not calling ourselves Simple Object Access Protocol. Are we getting this? So it's not simple writing a SOAP message. So how does .NET help? .NET says, I will give you a proxy class. If you want to create a client, .NET says, I will give you a proxy class. And this proxy class will do all the hard work for you. What are the hard work? What are the hard work we are saying? Create XML, create a SOAP, send a HTTP request, get back a response, extract the information. The proxy class will generate all this for you. So you don't have to worry about it. Hard work is being done by whom? By somebody else. This proxy that I'm creating for you. You have to only call the method on the proxy class. You know how to call a method on the class? Do you all know how to call a method on the class? Create an object of the class and call that method. So you just do that. And who will do all the hard work for you? Who will do all the hard work? Proxy class. Now the problem is that the proxy class that needs to be created needs to know about the service that's running. The proxy class can only be created if the service is exposing its metadata. What is metadata? I've asked you this before, but I like asking this question. What is metadata?
Where we get every data.
Data about data. But what data about what data? Data about the service. What data would you need to know about the service? Firstly, where is it running? Right? Secondly, what else? What are the methods that you want to call? What are the parameters of the methods? What are the return values? All of these details would have to be known to you. So this is being exposed through what is known as metadata endpoint. So the service generally provides a metadata endpoint, metadata exchange endpoint. Right? Why does the service provide this metadata exchange endpoint? What is the reason for doing so? So that what? So that the proxy class can be created by the client. Now we are not worried about the service. Service is up and running with the code that we wrote. Now we are worried about whom? About how my client is going to call me. So for the client to call me, I have to expose, I'm the service, I have to expose a metadata exchange point. So that metadata exchange point is a point where the client can call my service and get information about what is there on the service and create a proxy class. So all that we're doing now next is not for the service, is for whom? Is for the client to call me properly. Are we clear on this, everybody? So let's see what we're doing out here. first thing that we're doing here is service metadata behavior, creating a new object of that class. And what are we saying? Get enabled is true. That means the client can call my metadata exchange point. It's going to do a get on that. It can call that. So I am allowing the client to call my metadata exchange point. Why do we need the metadata exchange point? What is the client going to do with the metadata exchange point? What is the client going to do with the metadata
So that he
exchange?
can create
Metadata.
proxy class.
Sorry?
So that he can create its own proxy class.
Very good answer. So that who gave that answer again?
Anuj.
Anush, I told you, you should have day one only, you should have turned on your camera. You're a star. Right answer. I'm saying it in a joking way, but absolutely right. Bang on. I could not have given it better. So we are saying that the proxy class should be generated by the client so that his job of calling my service becomes easy. So which is why I'm enabling that metadata exchange point. So for which I'm saying firstly what get enabled is true. And then secondly, and more importantly, I'm adding a service endpoint. So see the service endpoint. First thing is, what is the name of this endpoint? What is the name of this endpoint? What is the name of this endpoint?
Max.
Max. So how will he access me? How will he access me? He will access me as this is the base address. This is the base address and add what word at the end? Add what word is max. So that's what we are doing out here. We added this. Achha. Secondly, what type of binding do you want to create? What type of binding do you want to create? A max HTTP binding. The max HTTP binding returns metadata. The max HTTP binding returns metadata. All right. And thirdly, what is the contract you want to use? What is the contract you want to use? So what contract are we using? What contract are we using? Yes, please.
I metadata exchange.
I metadata exchange. Did I create this? Did I create this? No. This is an inbuilt feature of WCF. So just by creating this endpoint, which says that the name of the endpoint is max, the type of binding I want to create is a max HTTP binding, and the contract that is going to be used is a iMetadata exchange. These are inbuilt options for allowing the proxy class to be created. When should you not create a proxy class? When should you not allow the user to create a proxy class? You're creating a service. You don't want somebody to create a proxy class. Why would you not want somebody to create a proxy class? Why would you not want anyone to create a proxy class? If you want to torture them, right? If you want to tell them, no, you do everything on your own, do it manually. I won't give you only. Right? So that's when you would, that's jokes apart. The proxy class is being used by the client to call your service in an easy manner. And this is what is enabling that. Are we getting this? So this second part of the code from here, line numbers 39 to line numbers 44. This is the code for allowing a proxy class to be generated. Clear? How many endpoints do I have now? I have two endpoints. One is the actual service that's running, and secondly is the max endpoint. Let's run this code. Server is done. So after doing this, host.open is creating a server. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm just going to copy paste this. So I'm running it with the control F5 and I'll explain to you the process of running this and all that. So what has happened at this point now? What has happened here now? The service is running. Okay. I'm going to keep it running. I'm going to keep it running. Right. I'm going to keep it running. And add a new project. What am I doing out here now? What am I doing right now?
Trying to access through this project.
I'm going to create a client for this service. Okay. So here, this also again, I'm taking it as a console app. I'm not changing anything so far. I'm taking this the console app. Okay. I'm not changing the name. Console app 2 create. All right. Now I want to add that proxy class. I want to add that proxy class. That proxy class is my best friend. Well, proxy class is going to do all the hard work for me. Do you all know a lot about proxies? Have you all used the proxy today? Yes. Unofficially, you all can tell me. Did you all use a proxy class? Your best friend who did all the hard work for you? Or no? If you all know that, then you all understand this concept well. Anyway, I'm in a very sarcastic mood today. I don't know why, what's happened to me, which side of bed I got down from. So anyway, or maybe it's just Anuj, you know, his presence that's causing this effect. Okay. So what do I want to do? Okay, jokes apart. Let's focus. Let's get serious. What do I want to do? I want to create a client. Client wants to call the code on the server. To call the client, you want to call that code from there. This time you're going to add a service reference. So see what I'm doing. Can I have your attention, please? In the references, instead of adding a reference, we're going to add a service reference. Right? So we're going to add, when you add a service reference, it's creating a client for you. Address, this is the address that I want. What is this address? Where did I get this address from? I copy pasted that address, that base address, and go. So it shows me if there's a service running. Service is running, right? I've got this service running here somewhere. So it shows me that this is my hello service. iService was the contract and the operations where there was hello. So if my class was not running, if I had not kept it running, then this would have not shown. I have kept it running with a control F5. Control F5 also allows me to continue coding. All right. So my server is running. I've added a reference. Now it's asking you for what? It's asking you for a namespace name. This is the name of the namespace in which the proxy class will be created. The proxy class will be created in some namespace. What is the name of that namespace that you want to create it? So I'm not changing the name. Service reference 1. And done. Done. The proxy class is created at this point. Proxy class is my best friend. Why is this my best friend? Because he's going to do all the hard work. He's going to do all the hard work of calling that service. I don't have to do anything. I'm just going to call that proxy class. It says, have you coded? Coded? Okay. Let me call you. All right. Now, when you added that proxy class, it also added for you what reference out here. See what reference it added. System.service model. So it's already added that reference out here. Okay. This is your proxy class. What are the name of the proxy? What are the name of the namespace? I had kept it as service reference 1. This is what I'm doing now. Service reference 1 dot service client. Who's this guy? Who's this guy?
Proxy object.
Who's this guy? Service client is who? He is your best friend.
Yes.
He is the proxy class that got generated for you. Obj is equal to new so and so. I just call my proxy class. And all that I'm going to do here is console.writeLine, obj dot. The method that I want to call here is what? Was hello. That's it. Done. When I call obj.hello, I'm calling a method on the proxy class. The proxy class is doing all the work for you. Was really simple. I mean, I'm talking so much, but the code was so simple. Yes or no? Right? That's it, done. Over and out. So when I run this now, that's your hello world. Who's returning this hello world? Is from the server. What have we done right now? We have created a web service. This web's not this part is calling the web service, but the first part there had been creating a web service. So if you knew your Java code of how to call a web service, go and call that. Service that's running in here can be called from the Java code. As simple as that. Are we clear on this? Questions, if any?
So,
Yes.
so would it make a difference if I wrote the same namespace name as in console app 2?
If you what? Did what?
Instead of giving service reference 1, what if I kept it in the same namespace, console app 2?
You
Like,
can do. No problem. But then only make sure that it doesn't clash with any existing classes.
Yeah, okay. For segregation, that's it.
Just the class names, you can't have two having the same name. Class names. I'm not talking about namespace names. Clear? Everybody? Yes? What if the service was not running? The service is running. How do I end the service? If I just press enter, the service ends. What if the service was not running? Press any Q, the service is ended. And if I try running this code now, what happens now? What happens now? This is the client trying to call that service. Boom. Right? What is it simply saying? Long message simply says what service is not running. I can't run. I can't find that service. Are we clear on this? All right. How did I add a service reference? How did I add a service reference? I click and add a service reference. Okay. Supposing I had not added a service reference. So delete this. Right? Delete the service reference. Supposing I didn't have that service reference. Okay. So obviously it's going to give me an error. I'll comment out the code for a moment. I'll come back to my code out here. I'll come back to my code out here. And I will not add a makes endpoint. I will not add a makes endpoint. I will not add a makes endpoint. And I run the service. Will my service run? Will my service run? Yes, no. No makes endpoint added. Will my service run?
No, sir.
Why not? Will my service run or no?
Achha,
I don't care about my
Service
client.
will run.
Yes, yes.
Service will run. Let's run this. Service is running. Makes endpoint not created. Okay. Now I come back to my client. What was it? Console app 2, right? Let me now add a reference. How do I add a reference? Right click, add service reference, and give this. And go. What happened? What happened? An error. So what is the problem? There was an error downloading the metadata. Why? Why? Come on, simple answer. Why?
No exchange endpoint.
No makes endpoint. As simple as that. So makes endpoint not available. This guy says, sorry, how do I find out? That guy is not telling me only what to do. He has all these methods and all that. I want to create a class here, but he has to allow me, na? If he doesn't show me only what is there, then how do I know? So are you understanding what is the problem here? So now you can't add a reference here. Now you can't add a reference. Your best friend is gone. Now you have to do what? Now you have to create XML. You have to create a SOAP message. You have to send it through an HTTP client. You have to get the received data back as a response. You have to do the reverse process. Painful. I'm not going to do that. I cannot do that. If you ask me right now, write code for it, I will not know how to do that. I'll have to search for help at 1,000 locations. Are you clear on this, everybody? So let's go back and spare ourselves the agony by creating what? What is this doing here now? Adding that makes sense. Questions, if any? Okay, I'm going to make things simpler for you. I'm going to make things simpler for you. You see all this code? You see all this code? What did we do? Create a service host, add your endpoints, define your behaviors, and then host.open and host.close. That's what I did. Yes. What if I make that code disappear? What if I make that code disappear? What am I doing here? Create a host, and then what? Create a host and then what? Host.open, and when you press read line, host.close. So what is this code doing now? Where is my service? Where is my endpoint? Where is my behavior? Where is all that defined? See the difference in the code? What are the difference here? What are the difference here? This is the service host, and then the last 4 lines, and then all this code in between I have skipped. I have skipped all this code, and I'm directly gone into this, and this is what I've got. So how is this working? How is this working? All these information that I was giving there in my code, now I can give in my config file. So this is where all the information has gone in. Into what? Into what? Into system.service module. These are the services. So which service? Now this is the name of the service. What is this? What is this? Yes, base address. What is this? What is this? What is this?
Binding and
HTTP binding, sir.
This is the first endpoint.
Yes.
What is the first endpoint giving? A blank address, basic HTTP binding, and the name of the
Contract.
contract. So I've given this out here. What about the second one? Does this look familiar? What is the second one? Does it look familiar? Which one is this? Which one is this? The MEX endpoint. Are we clear on this? Okay. Do you remember this? Do you remember this? What is this? Yes. What is this? What is this allowing you to do?
To create proxy.
Proxy class, create proxy.
What is that allowing you to do? Allowing you to say that the MEX endpoint should be accessible with a GET. So this is what we are doing out. So whatever code that I wrote in code, now I have removed that code and put that code into what? Into a config file. Right? I'm not going to explain the config file to you. Right? If you open the config file, a lot of the settings are self-explanatory. So I'm not going to explain that to you. purely because I don't expect you to learn the config file. If you ask me, even I don't know what is there in the config file. So what would I do? I would open the MSD and help and search what is there in the config file and copy paste that. But once I copy paste that, then I should know what to change. I should know what to change, what options to give out here. So what is there in the address binding contract? What is there in the HTTP GET? Why do I get HTTP GET in it? So if you know those things, then yes, that is what is required out. But I don't expect you to learn the code. I don't expect you to by heart that code of so many lines of config that we have. Are we clear on this? What was the code that I have written in here? I've written what? I've written a service contract. So this is your first method, the hello method. Second method we'll talk about a little later. And then I have got a class which implements the hello. All right? Are we clear on this? Okay. Okay. Now, if I had to create a new project out here, right? If I had to create a new project out here, there are different, WCF projects options available out here. One of the options there is a WCF service. So when I create a WCF service, okay, I'm not changing the name here. The difference between what I did in the first example and what I'm doing here is that the hosting part of it, I don't need to do. The hosting part of it would be done by IIS. So I need to focus on what? On only the service part of it. So see what all is happening out here. What are the things that I've created out here? If you look at the iService, what is the iService containing? Again, a service contract and a operation contract, right? What is the operation contract and service contract used for? Service contract is all your, contracts that you're creating when you're creating the ABC. What is an operation contract? What is an operation contract? What is an operation contract?
So
Every
services
method that needs to be available as an operation of that service needs to be marked with an operation contract. If you don't mark it as an operation contract, then it will not be available through the service. Are we clear on this? That's your operation contract. Ignore this actually. This is something called as a data contract. Data contract is if you're returning an object of some class through a service. So what am I returning in here? What is this method returning? An object of a class called composite type. So if you're returning another object of some other class, then you need to mark that class as a data contract. And the data contract class, then you can specify what are the members that you want to serialize and what are the members that you don't want to serialize. So ignore this. If I just take, a very simple this thing. What is this method returning? What is this returning here in this case? Get data returns a string. So it takes an integer as a parameter and returns a string. I have a class which is implementing the service. So what is the name of my class? Name of my class is service, which implements iService. And one of the methods it has is get data. All right. Now, when I show you the config file here, you'll find that most of the entries are not shown to you. All right. They're not included most of the entries out here. So it has added a lot of the things, created a MEX endpoint, created a regular endpoint. It has added this without showing you the code. Okay. It is creating a max endpoint. It is creating this. It is creating one default endpoint, which is using basic HTTP binding, but it's not showing me that code. So if you want to override that code, then the entries that we gave in our config file here, look at these entries. Where have we given these under what? System.service model. So these entries of ours will have to be given in here. So you can go and give in your own entries out here if you want, which I'm not doing with you. Okay. Let's try creating a client for this. So right click on the solution, add a new project. I'm creating a console app. All right, I'm not changing the name. What is the first thing that I'll need to do out here in my console app? What is the first thing? If I want to use this service, what is the first thing that I'll do?
So create a proxy class.
How do I do that? By adding a
Max
Service
endpoint.
reference.
service reference.
Service
All right.
reference.
Okay, so let me build the project once so that there are, if there are any compilation errors, those are taken care of. Let me build the service once and add a service reference. Add a service reference. Now, in this case, you don't even need to type this out. You can go and say discover the services in the solution. So if you've got IIS hosting the service, like in this case, I'm not creating my own host. Where is this going to be hosted? It's going to be hosted by IIS. When I discover this, it shows me all the other services that are running out there. And I can select from there and it would allow me to add that. So what are the two methods that the service had? What are the two methods that this had? One was get data and the other one get data using data contract. These are the operations that it had. Name in the namespace it's adding here is what? Service reference 1. I'm not changing that name. And say okay. Help me with the code, please. I've added a service reference called service reference 1. Help me with the code, please. One. How do you start with this? Service reference 1 dot service client, whatever O is equal to new service client. That's what I'm doing out here. All right. And console dot write line O dot. The method I'm calling is get data. So it requires an integer as a parameter and it returns something. So what is this code returning? If you look at the code, what does it return? Supposing I pass 10, what does it return?
Strings.
Yeah, so what is the string? What is it returning here?
You entered 0.
You entered, no, that won't be 0, that will be
Sorry,
curly bracket
first,
0.
yes.
Will be replaced with the value that I have entered out here. So if I
Okay.
pass 10, that is what will be receiving out here. Right? So this is what I'm doing. Then let me do a console.read line. Now when I'm running this project, I want both of these to be created. I want both of these projects to run one after the other. So to do that, I'm going to go into the solution properties. And there's an option here for multiple startup objects, which I'll say that the service should run first. And I will start this without debugging. And the console app should run second, and I'll start this with debugging. So I'm running two projects at the same time. Okay. So I would first run the service. And the second thing that's running is the console app. So console app is now okay. So because I gave it run with debugging, it gave you an error. Okay, and the setting was for debugging was not enabled out there. So let me try this again. All right, and I had passed 10, so it returned to me you entered 10 as the return. So what I'm trying to show you here in this example is simply this, that the service that you're creating, either you create your own host or you use an inbuilt host, which is like IIS. So in this second example, I have used IIS. Are we clear on this? Questions, if any? I will share this code with you, but essentially we are trying to do a 1 week topic in about an hour. Here we just tried creating a WCF service. What binding did we use when we created our own code? What bindings did we use? What binding did we use out here?
So one was basic HTTP binding.
Yeah, that was the binding that we're using out here.
So there was one other name of some binding, right?
Yeah, makes HTTP binding. Okay, so have a look at this. This is the link that I've opened. And let's just quickly talk about some of the bindings that are available here. Okay, so we had one was basic HTTP binding, a binding that is suitable for communicating with WS basic profile conformant web services, right? For example, ASP.NET web services, this sort of a thing. So there's a one-line explanation given or a couple of line explanation given on what that binding is. So that was the one that we have used. The second one that we had used was, or that I'm going to talk about here, is WS-HTTP binding. And this WS-HTTP binding is allowing you to create a binding for WSE. All right. So if you want to use web service enhancements options, that is a WS-HTTP binding. This will not work. Supposing you're creating a binding for WS-HTTP binding, this will not work with Java. With Java, the only thing that would work with would be your basic HTTP binding. All the other bindings that we're using are all the WSE enhancements. Okay. WS dual HTTP binding. It is allowing you to create what is known as a duplex service contract. So again, I'll talk about what is the duplex service, but that's using a WS dual HTTP binding. A federation HTTP binding is used for, federation is basically a group of sites. Like for example, if you log on to, let's say Google, then you're allowed to access your Gmail, your G Drive, all right, your whatever, let's say, other Google sites that you have out here, things like, let's say Sheets or, any other photos, any other Google related services. So you need to log in only once, and that same login is available for different websites. And this is referred to as a federation of websites. So if you're using those concepts, you can actually use a federated binding. Okay. These next ones, all of these, net HTTP binding. The word net here indicates that it is used for remoting. So net HTTP binding, net HTTPS binding. So what is net HTTP binding equivalent to? What is net HTTP binding equivalent to? Okay. Some power is a big one. Yeah. So what is the net HTTP? I have to actually hold on to it so that it keeps charging. Net HTTP binding corresponds to which one? I said net relies on or is equivalent to remoting. So this is the one that we are using. Or similarly, you'll have what? A net TCP/IP binding, a net TCP binding. So that's the next one for remoting, right? Net named pipes binding. The named pipes binding is used when if you're using, on the same machine only. If you're trying to do remoting on the same machine, that's where this would actually work, right? Or if you're doing a peer-to-peer binding or net MSMQ binding. Any guesses what this MSMQ would be equivalent of? Right? This is what we're talking. There are different types of bindings in each of these. Now you need to know the protocol before .NET. It's very difficult to explain to you what this is because you don't know what the protocol itself is. So if I tell you that, okay, it's using remoting, unless you know what remoting is, it would not make a lot of sense to you. Okay. All right. Remember this one, a web HTTP binding. So web HTTP binding would be used when you want to create RESTful services. Where else are you creating RESTful services? What else? What other way of creating a RESTful service do you know of? Do you know what's a REST service? Yes, no, some response. What's a REST service? REST, REST.
To get post test service. Just tweet almost.
Representational state transfer. Okay, but what does it do? What does a REST service do? When you create your web APIs, you're actually creating RESTful services, right? And RESTful services typically rely on the HTTP verbs to convey what should be done with the data that you're sending out. So for example, if you wanted to fetch some data, so then the verb that will be used would be an HTTP GET. Or if you're trying to insert some data, then you would be doing a HTTP POST. So along with your HTML request itself, the action that you want to perform is sent out there. So the HTTP verb would represent the action that is being performed on the data that you're sending in through the body, right? And such services are called as RESTful services. Web API is an example of a RESTful service. So if you wanted to create a RESTful service in WCF, then you can use a web HTTP binding. And the web HTTP binding would be allowing you to create a service similar to what you did with web API. right? So make a note of this. I can't be showing you all of this in code for you. It will take too long in terms of the code. I have that ready, but it's too much time to actually show you what's happening out there. So just make note of these protocols. How do you, instead of remoting, what would you use out here? The net, the services in the bindings that you're using starting with net are used for instead of remoting. The basic HTTP service, this is equivalent to creating what? Basic HTTP service is equivalent to creating a web service. WS HTTP binding is equivalent to creating a WSE service. The dual HTTP binding, I'll explain this again, right? I'll show you through a code example. Is creating what is known as a duplex service, and I'll explain what a duplex service works or how it works. So at least be aware of these bindings. Read through the bindings and that explanation of what it is. All of these net related. Okay, all of these net related are for remoting. The net MSMQ is for the MSMQ that we talked about, message queue that we are working. All right. And the other one that I'm asking you to use or to be aware of is web HTTP binding, which would be used for creating a RESTful service. So instead of web APIs, you'd be doing this. I'll be covering web APIs also with you all, but be aware of this. All right. Okay. One of the services that I've created here, I think it was in this one here, is what is known as a one-way service. So I have with the operation contract, I have a parameter here which says is one way equal to true. So this is typically used for any methods that don't return a value. Whenever you're calling a service from the client, what is the client doing? The client is sending a request, right? The client sends a HTTP request or sending a request and getting back a, what is the server return?
The response.
A response. Now, supposing you have a server method, a method on the server, which is not returning any value. This method is returning a void value. Now, in such cases, waiting for the response doesn't make sense. Why should it not make sense? Why should I not wait for the response? For this method, why should the client not wait for the response? Yes.
So it won't affect the working.
Because there is no response.
Yeah, again, yeah,
server is not sending back anything. Now imagine if I have to wait, supposing the server to process this. Look at the hello to. What am I doing in here? What am I doing here? I'm putting in a delay. Supposing to process this request, it takes a very long time. Right? Now, I am waiting at the client for a very long time for no response. It's like me asking a question. I says, okay, what do you think this should do? And right now, at least 4-5 of you all, 2-3 of you all have switched on your videos. So both guys there are doing all the answering. I don't know what the others have done. They walked away from me. And I'm just waiting. I'm waiting 5 minutes. Like, okay, some question will come, some response will come, but nothing comes in. So why is nothing coming in? Because you're not sending me back any response. Right? You're not sending me back any response. The response here is a void. But I'm doing what like an idiot out there? I'm sitting around waiting. Ki, acha, when would the next question come? When would the next this thing? I'm just waiting. So instead of that, what I should be doing, I'm not doing it, but what I should be doing is a fire and forget mechanism. Okay, I just come, take the lecture and walk away. I should have done that from day one. Right? Just come and take the lecture, say, this is it, this is it. These are the notes, go take down the notes and done. Whether you try anything or not in the lab, I don't care. So I give you this thing and I walk away. So it's a one-way method. That's called a one-way method. So if you notice this, I have actually marked this as a one-way method. So one-way method is where the client will only send a request, but not wait for the response to come back. Right? So this is called as a one-way method. Okay. Now, one of the things that we had talked about there was a do-play service. And the do-play service right? The do-play service uses something called as WS dual HTTP binding. Now, this is a very interesting service again. What happens in the do-play service is very interesting. So what it says is that supposing the client has to call a long-running method on the server. Okay. So this method, let's say, is going to take 1 hour to execute. Right? It's a really long running. Now, in such a case, what would happen with the client if the client calls the method and is waiting for the server to receive a return a value for 1 hour, for example? I'm just giving an approximate number. The client would be just waiting, doing nothing. So the client says, I don't want to wait for that long. So how does this mechanism work? What happens now is the client sends a one-way request to the server. So what is the client doing now? Saying that, okay, I'm calling the method on the server, but I'm not going to wait back for the response. So this is what a do-play is all about. I'm sending a request to the server, but I'm not waiting for what? A response from the server. Now, server receives the request. Right? And along with the request, it receives what is known as a callback. Right? It receives a callback. It receives a callback function this client is saying. So client is now saying, you know what? This is the data that you want. I'm sending it to you as a one-way request. So don't tell me when it's coming back. I'm not going to wait for you to finish because you're going to take a very long time. Now, server, after receiving this, starts its processing. So server starts processing. Right? Server starts processing. At some point, server finishes processing. And server now server becomes the client and sends a one-way request to the client containing the return values or return value. Let me put it this way. Now, how does it know where to send it on the client? Where to send it on the client? So the server has received a callback information out. So here, whatever the callback on the client, that's what it's actually doing. If you notice this communication happened in two one-way requests. There was a one-way request from the client to the server. There's a fire and forget mechanism, and client is now disconnected. It's no longer connected to the server. Server receives the request with information about what to call on the client. The server starts processing, server becomes the client and sends a one-way request to the client, which contains the return value of what it had to return. And this here is an example of a duplex service, which uses the dual mechanism, it uses the dual binding, dual HTTP binding. So all of these are very interesting, but all of these are going to take a long time to do. I cannot afford to show you each of these in the code. To explain the code itself, is a little time consuming. Imagine to write the code is much more complex and much more demanding. So I'm not sharing that code with you. I'm just giving you in concept what a duplex service is. All right. Okay. So this is what I am stopping with in terms of WCF. I'm not done with the session, but this is where I'm going to give you a small break at this point of time. Of how to create a WCF service and how to consume a WCF service. So we've just tried out one small hello world example. I will share the code for the server that I've created, and you have to try the code for the client. Client code, what do you do? Keep the server running and then add the service reference and specify the URL out there. That is what you are expected to do in the client. So don't even try attempt coding the server. You can take my server, use that code and write code for a client to call a WCF service. Other things, whatever I've discussed, those are the things that you need to be aware of in terms of what WCF is doing. All right. Questions, if any, before I take a break? All right. So I'm going to take a small break at this point. We'll take a 15-minute break. It's about 6:15. So let's say it's almost 6:15. 6:30, we'll resume with the session. When you come back, we're going to look at Web API. All right. So Web API again is something that hopefully you all should be a little clearer about. And there it's not very different from what sort of code you have been already writing. So it will be a little easier for you to work with code-wise. Concept again is the same thing. Two different applications wanting to exchange data with each other. Right. See you at 6:30. Okay. So essentially, what is if you look at what is Web API out here. Okay, this is actually a REST-based option for interchanging or exchanging of data. So again, here you would have a server, you would have a client. The client would contact the server would send details back to the client. Now, while working with RESTful data or representational state transfer, typically what you would have is you would have two parts to it. One is the data itself that you're sending, and secondly, the action that you would be performing on that data. Now, this action that you're sending would be represented by a HTTP verb. All right. And the 4 HTTP verbs that you would be using typically in a Web API or in a RESTful service are based on the 4, the basic CRUD operations that you're performing. So to begin with, there's a get, and this get is similar to what you do with the select. So the HTTP get, HTTP post, and this post would be similar to what you're doing with an insert. An HTTP put, which would be similar to an update, and an HTTP delete, as the name suggests, would be similar to a delete operation that's happening. So I'm saying that along with the request that's going, your web APIs are going to use HTML, basic HTTP requests and response model to send data and get back the responses. And the body would consist of the actual data that you're sending, or it could also be part of the URL. So these are two places where you would be sending your data. And the verb would indicate what is the action that the server should perform on this data. Right? So Web API is a very fast sort of gaining popularity out here because it's so simple to use, because of the fact that it is using a protocol that is understood by everybody. What are the possible applications that you can have out here? One application, of course, could be when you're creating your services. You have pages, maybe a single page application or any other page. Contacting the server, getting the response, and then showing the response on that particular page. So you could actually have some sort of jQuery code which sends a request, gets the response from the server, and manipulates and shows the response out there. So that could be one way of doing it. Or any other application which need not be on a web page itself. The application itself could receive the data and send the values back again, or format the values and show it in a different way. Creating a web API application in .NET is relatively simple. All right. When you're creating a web API application here, it again uses the MVC format. It uses the MVC pattern. So wherein you're talking about a model and a view and a controller. But typically your view would not be sending back data in the form of HTML. You'd be sending back data in the form of JSON. So whatever data that you receive or whatever data that you send back would be in a JSON formatted string. Let's try creating a simple web API application. We're going to create two things out here. We're going to create a web API application itself and a client for the same. So you all can do this with me. In fact, you all don't need to do it separately. You can go in for Visual Studio and create a web-based web API application. All right. So going in for a new project, you all can do this on your screens itself and see what's happening in there. All right. So going for a ASP.NET web application. Right, going for the ASP.NET web application, that's the one that I've selected. And I'm calling okay, so this is the nomenclature that I'm using out here.
All right.
Somebody's mic is on, so we can hear what's happening. Yeah, I'm having tremendous problems with my. I'm just afraid my power is going to get shut off. The power cord is good, and I'm not really trying to do that. Get it fixed. Possibly any problem. Yeah, so this is what I've done. I've gone for a new web application. The only difference here is we'll no longer be going in for MVC. Instead, we'll be going in for Web API. So the other option that we had here, wherein, project template for creating RESTful services. When you look at the Web API, look at what references it's adding by default. What are the things it's doing for you? Adding not just Web MVC, but also adding Web API. Both of these are being added. Do not configure for HTTPS and create. Okay. If you look at the structure of your project, it's very similar to what you've been used to working with. So here also there's a controllers, models, and there is a, views out here. So this application can actually be used as a MVC application also, right? You don't need to only work with this as a Web API. So it can be used as an MVC application also. I'm not doing that. I'm not using this as a web app MVC application. If you look at app_start, there are two files out here. One is rootconfig.cs, and that's the one that is going to be used for MVC. Actually, you can be heard, you're on unmute. So one is root config, and this is the one that you're using for your normal, MVC type application. The second thing is Web API config. And if you look at the Web API config, look at the root template that has been given out here. What is the default root template that they're given? API/controller/ID. Right? So this is the one that has been created for you by default. Now, the difference here is going to be that the data that you're going to be sending is going to be part of a HTTP request. It's not going to be an HTML page going back and forth. You're just going to be sending in data in JSON format. Right? Let's look at some of the controllers that has already been created for you. So look at the home controller that has been created, and that is similar to what you've been doing all along, right? That is the MVC controller. So ignore that controller. Look at the other controller. And what is that returning here in this case is the values controller. What do you see different from the normal controllers that you've been working with so far? How is it different? What is the first difference that you would see out here?
So it is inheriting from API controller.
Correct. So your normal controllers that you've been working with so far have been inheriting from controller, but your API controller is now the base class for your other controller that we are creating. Okay. You'll find that there are different methods created here, like a get, post, put, and a delete. Get has two variations. So what are the two variations? One is get by itself, and one is get for a particular ID. So now when you're saying get by itself, this returns an IEnumerable of string. So this is just like a hello world that is being returned. Okay. So what is this going to do? It's going to convert this string into JSON and return these two strings out here as a hello world type of thing. So instead of value 1, value 2, you could have simply said, let's say hello and world, for example. Right? It's just returning two strings. You can return more strings if you're here if you want. And the other one, what is this one doing? What is this one doing? Getting an ID as a parameter and returning a particular string. Now, I'm not going to make changes in this. I'm going to actually add my own controller and work with this. But let's try and understand how this is working. So if you look at this, what is the name of the controller in this case? Values controller. And if you look at the template, what are we calling it as? API / the name of the controller. So the word API is fixed. It's not in curly brackets. It's fixed. And then ahead of that would be the actual controller that we are using. All right. All right. So if you look at the values controller, does this make sense now to you? API/values. What is values here?
Controller name.
Controller name. So supposing this controller was X, it would have been API/X. Supposing it was X controller, it would have been API/X. Now this is going to give you all the values. On the other hand, API/value/5. So if you pass some particular ID, what is this returning here in this case? One particular value. Okay. Let's try running this. Let's try running this. And remember, this is not returning a view. It is returning a string or an IEnumerable of string. So how do I get this now? How do I get this one here? This is my localhost / so and so. What do I get ahead of that? /API/values. And what would this return to me in this case? What is this returning to me here in this case?
2 strings.
Yeah, a couple of strings out here. This is what we are actually returning out here. This could have been also returned as API/values/ whatever the ID that you're returning. And what is this returning here in this case is a string. By default, it is using XML serialization. It's converting it to XML and returning it out. Are we clear on this, everybody? All right. Now, instead of returning this, I would like to return some, object of my class as actual data out here. Okay. So, all right. So look at this now. I have a model class out here called students. What is this simply having now? This is having student ID, name, and marks. And if I have to compare this, compare it to what you have, I purposely opened an existing project. Instead of returning, look at your code. What is your code returning? The values controller was returning what? An IEnumerable of string. Instead of an IEnumerable of string, what have I changed this to?
Student.
IEnumerable of a student. And what would you do in this case? What would you do in this case? Create a list of students and read the values from the database and return a list of students. So have you written code like this before somewhere where you're, returning a list of employees or whatever? Where is that? Where would you do that?
Index.
In the index. So code similar to that would be actually returned, and this is what would be returning out. Instead of get, returning a string, what am I change this to? Get returning a student class. So based on the ID that I've got, I would like to pick up one particular student and return this. So again, what do I do? Create an object of type student, read this from the database and return the student. So what is this method similar to? What is this method similar to? Yes?
Details.
The details. Absolutely right. Okay, look at the next one. This receives, this is the post. When would the post be called? Whenever you're trying to do an insert. So this receives a student as a parameter. Receives a student as a parameter. Where is the student being passed from? Where am I getting this from? Where am I getting this from? From the body of the HTML code. Now, even if I don't give from body, it still takes it as from body. And what would I do in here now in this case? When the post, whatever student I receive,
Database code.
insert it into the database. So what is this code similar to? What is this code similar to? Yes.
Update.
Not a
Create,
insert.
create.
The create
Insert.
post. The post for the create. Similarly, the ID and the student value. This is being received here in the put, and put is an equivalent of the update. So here what you do is you would update this value into the database. So again, you have got code in your update which does something similar. So instead of student, you can use the employee class. I've just shown you with student. You could do that same thing with the employee class. And similarly with delete. Delete receives what now as a parameter? Int ID. And all that we're doing here is deleting it from the database. So this is what you would be writing out here. This is what your server is doing out here. Are we clear on this, everybody? Instead of that values controller, look at the code that you have for values controller. This is throwaway code. This, you're not going to write code like this. You typically work with what? With an object of some class and change the values out here accordingly. So again here, if I have to go through this again, IEnumerable of string replaced by what? IEnumerable of
Student.
whatever class that you're using. Instead of string, return an object of that class. Instead of string value, this should be whatever, student value, employee value, whatever you're taking here. String value replaced with employee value. And again, ID here is the same. ID is not changing. So these are the methods that we are calling out here. Are we clear on this, everybody? Okay. So let me get back to my project. Did I have that open? I forgot. I think I might have. All right. So how do I add this student out here or whatever? What do I do out here? What do I, how do I generate the code for that? See what I could do. Okay. What I'm doing here is I'm making a copy paste of this class, and this to show you what I'm doing here. You can actually use the same student class that I'm putting out there. I put that into the chat window. Let's add a model. Let's add a new class. Name of the class, of course, was student. Okay, and I've just, for your convenience, I've put that class out there. You can copy paste that class out here. Okay, build the solution. Anytime you make a change in your model, you need to build the solution. And let's add a controller for this. So help me with this. Tell me what should I do next. Right click on controllers and add a controller. Now, when you're adding a controller here, what sort of controller are we adding with these? What are these controllers? All of these are for MVC. So you'll find that there's an option here for Web API. And that's the one that I want to pick up. If I pick up empty controller, if I pick up an empty controller, then it will generate code for you, which is like that values controller. You remember the values controller that we first saw? That was your empty controller. It will generate code for you that way. Now, if you go in for Web API controller with read-write actions, then it will generate the code like what we saw for student. And if you go in for entity framework, then what will it actually choose now? It will generate all the code for your class, and you can actually call the code from there. So I'm going to right now go for the third option, which is Web API controller with read-write actions. Add this. call this what? Students controller. Right? And change string to students everywhere. Change strings to student everywhere. Student is, of course, is in a different namespace. So just add a using on that namespace. Right? And I'm not writing code out here. I'm not writing code out here, but you would have to, write that code that we had out there. Okay. So this is what I'm asking you to do. Okay. And once you finish doing this, correctly, this is what your code would look like. Are we clear on this, everybody? So this is how you would get this code. I'm again going to copy paste this code for you to quickly save on a little time and not have to manually do all of these things again. So I've just put that code out there, and this is how you could go ahead and create your own students controller. Now, instead of students controller, what I'm going to ask you to do, of course, is you don't have a students database. You have what? You have an employee database, right? So when you're on your own, one second. Yeah. Yeah. So if you have the employee controller, which has all the code in there, you'll have to actually go and write down the code. Would you all be confident enough to write down the code for employees similar to what, the methods that you'll have written down there and calling the methods and all of that? Could you all complete that on your own? Would that be possible for you all? Yes, no, whatever. Is that a yes? Is that a no? Is that I have no clue what you're doing? What is it? Some response, please.
Sir, are you asking to write the exact code that we have written earlier for database?
Exactly. Yes.
Yes. So yeah, we can do that.
Right. So all that I'm
Yes,
saying
sir.
is that you write your own code instead of the code being generated. I'm going to show you how to use the entity framework. Right. But in your code earlier, you have already got those classes. You got that code. You got that, the objects. You're returning a collection of employees. You're returning a single employee. You're doing an insert. You're doing an update. You're doing a delete. So all that this is doing is calling that code. So you create a model class and you go ahead and complete the code for employee on your own. That's what I'm asking you to do. Other than Kaustuv don't answer. Other than Kaustuv, anybody ask me questions about this, about what I'm saying, whether it's possible or not for you all to do. Have you all understood what I'm asking you to do? And secondly, how are you going to do it? Is it going to be easy for you, or do you want me to spoon feed you and give you all the code out here? Is my question to you. Do you think you can do it on your own?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
I'm not getting the confidence. There are 3 people who are saying yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So this is what I'm asking you to do for trying it out on your own. I'm going to show you another way. I'm going to show you an easier way of doing this. So obviously, to read values from the database, to update values, one option is you write your own code, which is what I'm asking you to do. Second option is use the entity framework. So if you have to use the entity framework, let's see how we could work with this. First thing, for using the entity framework, what do you need to do? First thing is what? So, yes.
So
First thing is
add entity framework from NuGet package manager.
correct. So do a NuGet package manager, add the entity framework, and that's what we have done. Install this. Okay, accept. You don't have an option. You just have to say yes. and finished working, finish installing. Now build the solution after that. Build the solution after that. Right? Okay. I want to connect to employees. So what would I do out here? I want to connect to employees. So what would I need to do out here? What is this? Right? What is this out here? Yes.
CDAC diagram.
Yeah. Okay, it's taking too much time. Let me go back to this one. All right. So let's try adding a controller now. If you add a controller, a new controller, a web API controller, but this time I'm picking one with entity framework. So that's the third option that we had out there. So instead of read write actions, you do the entity framework. And with the entity framework, again, it'll ask you for the model class. It'll ask you for the data context class. So prerequisite, before I do this, before I do any of this, help me with the steps. Help me with the steps of connecting to the entity framework. What would I do?
Project.
Yes. Go ahead. Project menu ka carry on. Add new item,
Items,
right? Look out for what?
entity.
Entity.
Look out for entity and then connect to your ADO.NET entity data model. Change the name if you want to. And this is all that is happening out here. I mean, all of the things that it's doing out here. So these are the same steps as what you had done before. Okay. Was it 2022 or only 22? Yeah.
20.
Right. So test connection succeeded. Next. Right. And select the things that you want and finish. Are we clear on this? Okay. All right. Now, when you create that employee, the problem is that the employee also contains, a reference to department. You get what is happening here? This employee also contains what? A reference to department. What is the reference to department? Where has it got that? Remember that department? Yes or no? All right. Now the problem is that when you're going to receive data or when you're going to send data back, this extra information might cause you problems. So while writing an API for employees, are you going to also accept department's data? While accepting the API for employees, are you going to also accept department data?
Suggest
Yes.
department number, not department as an object.
No, name and number, would you accept that?
No, sir.
But this here, this employee class here expects you to pass this department details out here. And this department details is also containing other values out here. So I don't want this to happen, right? I don't want this to happen. So I'm going to delete that model and recreate it again. And this time, I'll only select the employee details that I want out here. So I'll just pick up the employees without picking up the departments. And the reason for that is that I don't want the extra departments details also to be passed here as an object of the employee class. All right. Okay. Let's build this again and try out how this works. So this is still running. So now if you see the employee class, this class only contains what? What are the things it only contains? Only the employee related details. I don't have any other details being passed out here. Okay. Let's now create the employee controller again. So right click on controllers, add a controller, which is a web API controller for the entity framework, using the entity framework. The model class is of course employee. The data context class is the one that was selected here, and click on OK. So now the difference between what I have asked you to do earlier and what has happened here is, in the earlier case, you would have to write your own code to return the different objects, return the different, write down the code for creating the database, for opening the connection, for inserting the value, updating the value. But all this code is already generated for me. All this code is already generated for me, right? And this code again is doing what? What is this returning here? Get employee is returning what? A iQueryable of employee. So iQueryable of employee is actually a collection of employees again. In link, this is what is being returned. If you are having get employee, now the get employee is not returning only an employee object. It's only not returning only an employee object. What is this returning here? It says return OK of employee. And OK here is a HTTP status. So if you see this OK, this is actually a object of type HTTP, a result out here. So along with the data that you have, we are also returning a HTTP status indicating whether it worked correctly or not. Okay. If you look at the put employee, what is this doing for you? Put employee, what is this calling here in this case?
So for update.
Update. So first thing is receiving the ID. ID is actually coming in from here. ID will come in from here. And this value is coming in from the body of that method. Now, when you call this again, what is it again returning? Check out what it's returning here. Sorry, not here. So we are trying to update a record. First possibility is, what is it returning? One possibility is what? If it is not valid, then returning a bad request. If the employee number out here is not matching the employee ID here, it returns again a bad request. So these are all HTTP status codes that are being returned. And similarly, if the employee was not found, returns a 404. Now, if everything else was correct, it's just returning the status code, but not returning any data from there. So what is the value out here in this case? It is returning a no content out here. No content is it does not contain any data, and the status code will be either a success status code or a failure in this case. So if it is everything is okay, then it's returning a status code of okay. So if you notice here, there are not just employee details being returned. What is also being returned is two things. One is the employee details and one is the status code, HTTP status code of that particular status. Similarly here in the post employee, this is returning a created a root status. So all of these are HTTP status codes. And along with that, what is it also passing back here? What is it also passing back here? Is the employee details out here. So that is why instead of just simply returning an employee object, it is returning actually what? Returning what is this? HTTP status code. In the delete again, instead of just returning nothing, here it's returning either a not found or a okay status code. So how do you test these out? How do you run this and see whether it's working fine or not? If you try running this code and if you try doing API slash, if you try doing this API slash employees, what will this give you now right now? If you try running it with API slash employees, what is this going to give you? Slash API slash employees. What will this give you? Yes. What is this returning?
So like collection of employees.
All the employees out here. So this is what is being returned out here. This is what is being shown to you here. So these are all the employees that we had out here. Are we clear on this, everybody? So these are the records. I mean, Shiv Kumar and then Deshi, Aditya 1, 2, 3, Ganesh. My record also new and then new again and whatnot. So these are the records that we had out here. Are we clear on this, everybody? Okay. Now, what if I did this? Get employee of ID. So I said API slash employees slash and then the ID. So let me return employee number 1 who was Shiv Kumar. So slash 1. What is this going to return now in this case? Only one record here. But how do I now test out the post or the put or the delete? I can't do this from the browser. And the reason why I can't do this from the browser is because the browser is only doing a get for me. It's not doing all the other verbs for me. It's only sending a HTTP get. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to keep this running. I'm going to copy paste this code. Right? I'm going to keep it running. I'm not going to stop running this. And right, I have a utility called Postman. Now that Postman is just allowing me to send different HTTP requests. Okay. When you open Postman, there would be an option here for starting off a new session. Right. So I'm going in for a new workspace. And I want to try out creating a basic HTTP request. And this is the URL that I'm going to give out here. Right? That's the URL that I'm going to give out here. Where did I get this URL from? Where did I get this URL from? Where did I get this URL from?
API.
When I ran my project, that was the URL that came up.
Yes.
I copy pasted that. So what is this giving me? This is giving me Shiv Kumar's record. Or if I said get all employees, so this is giving me all the employees out here. And if you notice, this is being returned in what format?
JSON.
In JSON format. Right? Now let me try different options out here. So let's start with maybe if I wanted to employee number 5, all right, or employee number 8. Employee number 8 is, this new record. So instead of a get, I could do a delete and slash employee number 8, right? So when I do this, when I run this, right? Notice here, what does it show you here? What is this giving you here?
Status code 200. Okay.
Status code of OK. And this was the employee that was actually deleted. So if you look at the code that was generated for you, look at the code that was generated for you, what did delete do? What did delete do? What did delete do? It is returning if it could delete it, it's returning a OK status code along with what?
The object we deleted.
The object that we deleted. So it actually is returning this. So this is the data that is actually coming. All right. Now if you look at the raw data, this is in this format. Pretty data is just a little formatted data. Are we clear on this? All right. If I did not find that employee, what are the status code it returned in this case?
Not
Not found.
Not found. Okay. So let me go back and do a get first. And let me do a get on all employees. All right. Get on all employees. And you'll find that employee number 8, that was after Vikram's record, that has gone away now. That has actually been deleted. Okay. If I try doing a get again on employee number 8, right? What is the status code out here again now?
4, not 4, not 4.
4, not 4. And there's no data coming back in here. So that's how you're actually checking out all of this. If I do a delete on this, same thing on this URL, and I send this again, you'll find that again what status code was 404. So now you'll have to check out for 2 things. One is what is the status code, and secondly, what is the actual data that is being returned out here. So what are the 2 things what are the 3 methods we have tried out? We have tried out a get all, get with one ID, or a delete with one ID. This is what we've tried so far. What are the other 2 methods that we need to try out?
Post and put.
Post and put. But post and put, see what it took as a parameter. If you look at the code, see in the get, in this get, I didn't have any parameters. So this was for getting all employees. I didn't have any parameters. In this get, the only parameter I took was what? The ID, which was being received by the URL. The URL actually given this. In the delete also, what did I have? The ID was the only parameter which was being received from the URL. But now look at put and post. Look at put and post. What is, let's look at put or look at post first. Look at post out here. What does it take as a parameter?
Employee object.
All right. Now, where is this employee object coming in from? Where is this coming in from? This is coming in from the body of the request that is being sent out here. So the request would contain all these details. So you'll notice that there's nothing in the URL. I'm not passing the employee in the URL. It's coming in the body of the request. And if you look at post, for example, look at what post takes. Sorry, put takes. One part of it is what? First part of it is
ID.
ID coming in from the URL. And the second part of it would come in from where?
Body.
From the body. So now you have to, when you're calling these, you have to pass something in the body. Now, what would you be passing in the body? So supposing, for example, I'll just do a get on, I don't have 8, but I have 5, right? So now this body that I'm seeing out here is what I'll have to pass out here. So this is how your JSON, how your object is being represented. So I'm going to change that from a get to a put. What is the put going to do? Employee number 5 is going to update the value. And if you go to the body, all right, this is what I'm giving out here. So let's say I'm giving this as 20,000. Okay. And I've changed this Vikram to Vikram 1 to 3. So these are the values that I've changed. So initial value was Vikram, and then, basic was 10,000, which I've changed to Vikram 1 to 3 and 20,000. So this is what I've done. What else have I also done? What else have I also done? What is this, Ram?
Employee ID.
ID has been passed as the URL, and this here is in JSON format. Don't send it as text format. This is in JSON format. So this is where you're forming the body and send the values. Now, when you send the values, check out for two things. Check out for the status and check out for the return value. So status 204 is actually an OK. All the 200 statuses are actually an OK. And this is worked correctly. Now, how do I know it's worked correctly? What do I do to check out whether it's worked correctly? If I do a get again on 5, all right, and the body here doesn't matter because I'm not I'm not reading that body in there. But if I do a get on 5 and I call this now, so that's my 200 OK, and this is my updated value in the database. So you're using Postman to actually test whether your web API is working correctly or not. And these are the 4 basic operations that you're doing: a get, a post, a put, and a delete. If I have to do the same thing now with a post, I'll put in an ID which is not there. So let's say employee number 50. I don't think I have employee 50. Employee 50, right? And whatever, let's say XYZ, and with these values. So this is now a post that's happening. In fact, a post doesn't need the ID, right? Post needed what? Post didn't have a ID in the parameter. It only needed what?
Employee object.
Employee details out here. And that's what I'm posting. So again, after I run it, check out the status. That is what is the key thing out here. So I send this and the status was 201 created. So see what it gave you. Where is that? This is what the created at root is given. Are we clear on this? So this is how you're actually getting in the values out here. Clear on this, everybody? If you now again did a get, and if you did get all employees, you'll find that the employee number 50, the one that we just added, has been added into the database. So there are 2 aspects to this. One aspect to this is, of course, how you are, calling those methods using Postman. Okay, because it's not going to be possible from the browser to do your put, post, delete. You can do your gets, but put, post, delete will not work. So this is what I've done in the Postman. Are you all comfortable with this one? Is it easy for you? All that we have done is, if you don't have Postman, download Postman. So it's a 5-minute download that will that you can use out here. Now, this is one aspect of it. This is one aspect of it. So this is for me to test out whether my code is working correctly or not. Now I'm going to do the same thing by writing code. So rather than, do it for just the testing purpose, I'm going to write code to send a HTTP request. And I'm going to write code to, whatever request I've sent, how to get the response back and to read the response out. So let's see how we could do this. Are we okay with Postman? All the different operations that you are, trying, you try it out on your own. If you get stuck somewhere, just, do a YouTube video on Postman and it will give you, help on how to send these values or whatever. Or even if you search for help. There should be plenty of options available on how to use Postman. Now, okay, I'm going to keep this running. I'm going to keep this running, and I have already coded and already used in previous examples a client for Web API. Now, when you're using this client for Web API, I have created a console app which uses this NuGet package. So you'll have to do a NuGet on Microsoft.ASP.NET.WebAPI.client. That's the one that you need to do a NuGet on. Okay. Now, how do I call that API? What are the things that I'm going to be using for calling this? So I'm going to be doing a get, I'm going to be doing a put, post, and a delete. So these are the 5 operations that I'm doing. The get itself has 2 operations, right? The get has a get all and get single, wherein you're passing it an ID. Now, this I have done it in one of my previous programs, but the URL that we were using in our application was this one. This is what we are using. So what is this going to do actually? This is the one that you're using for get single, right? This is the one that you're using for get all. Now, if you notice this part of your code is more or less going to be the same, right? This part will be the same. Only thing that will keep changing there would be what? Would be the port number. And what would this depend upon? The second part, what will this depend upon?
Type of request.
The name of the controller that you're calling. So for example, if I'm calling employees, this should now be employees. If I was calling students, it will be students. If it was departments, this will be departments, and so on and so forth. So I've sort of hard-coded this part. And I'm saying instead of 49217, I'm going to use what port number? The one that I just copy-pasted from. So 55836. So if you're going to try my code, I will share this code as well. If you're going to try my web client or web API client, all that you'll need to do is change the port number to reflect your application out there. So this is my URL to begin with. What would get all do? What should get all do now? It should call this one and send a HTTP get for this one. So what is missing in here? What is the only thing missing in here? What is the only thing missing in here is what?
Employees.
The word employees. And this is what I'm doing in my get all. So I'm starting with the base address. So base address was my URL given here. This is my base address. Okay. To this base address, I'm going to do a get. I'm going to do a get on what? Get on employees. So when you say get async, all right, it asks you for the URL, and this URL is added to your base address. So I'm creating an HTTP client object. I'm going to be calling client.getAsync. Just like I have a getAsync, I have other methods here. Look at what the other methods here are. Look at what the other methods here are. One was getAsync. The other one would be, other corresponding methods would be what? Delete async,
Delete.
post async, right? Put async, right? These are the other methods that I'm using out here. Now, if I create a HTTP client, I'm actually sending a HTTP get request on this line. But this is, I'm calling it, this code calls it in an asynchronous manner. So when you call it in the async manner, what's going to happen here in this case? whatever you're calling, what would happen now with that async, this thing? This should be run on a separate thread. Now, I don't want to do the next part of the code until I finish the earlier part. Unless it gets me the response back, I don't want to carry on with the code. So what do I do here in this case? What do I do in this case?
Waiting.
So we can write await.
Yeah, perform a wait, right? You could have done a await as well. Now, you could have done an await if that returned a task.
Yes.
So that may not be returning a task. If you look at get async here, yeah, it does return a task. So you could have used an await as well. So I'm actually doing a response task dot wait. And after this is over, what are we doing here in this case? What are we getting here in this case?
The result of the task. I mean,
All right. So the result of what that method is returning. What is that method returning? What is the get method returning? What are the get employees returning?
I queryable of employee.
I queryable of employee. Now this, in this case, it also returns to you a status message of OK if the task worked correctly. So if you try running it with Postman, I think I might have Postman up and running. If you do it with this, you see what is the status being returned here for the get. For the get, what is the status being returned here is OK. So the OK status tells us that it could return the values correctly. So first thing is checking for whether it is a success status code or not. So 200, 204, all of these are success status codes. And if it was successfully received, I'll come back to that code later. But if it was successfully received, then what do you want to do now? What do you want to do now here? If it was successfully received, what do you want to do now? Yes. What would you like to do now?
Return
that collection.
The data that is being returned, the data is being returned through the response. Now I want to actually get those employees out here and display them in my code. So read as async. So content dot read as async. This is reading the content from there. So I already have created an employee class out here, by the way, which matches what I'm doing, which is why I'm able to do this. And this is returning an IList of employee. All right. So I'm returning a IList of employee by calling a read as async. Now there are two possibilities. Either, there's an empty collection, or if it is full, then it would, then be able to work with this. If for whatever reason, if it didn't give that content, if that status code is not true, then what are we doing here in this case? We're going into an else which says that there's a error message out here. But if this was valid, then get the result from here, and this result here is an IEnumerable of employees which I am now looping through, and this is just displaying me all the employees out here. So the get all code is simply trying to find out whether it was successful or not. If successful, read the employees and display me the values, the employee name and the number out. All right. So let's try running this. I'm not displaying all the values. I'm just displaying the name and employee number and employee name. Right. So these are the details that I'm getting here from my details. How would the code for this be different? For get single be different? First thing is, what would be the change out here in the URL? If I had to do it for get single, what will be the change in the URL?
we will have
We have to
add
pass ID.
dash.
ID.
/ID.
So here in this case, again, I'm creating an HTTP client and passing it with the employee/1, right? Similar code. Check for whether the status code is, successful or not. And just to take you into this code here, what is it returning? It's returning the status code, and along with this, what is it also returning is a employee object out here. So this is what the response type is giving you. Now, instead of in the earlier case where I had an IList of employee, what am I now returning, or what am I trying to read now here in this case is a employee object, and read task.result would return directly the employee object, which I'm printing is name. So employee number 1, who was he? Was it Shiv Kumar's record?
Yes, sir.
I think it was Shiv Kumar's record, right? So instead of looping through all the records now here, it's simply returning to me one single record, right? And this is the ID that was being returned. Now, both these methods have using a get in this case. Both these methods were using a get. What changes now here, for example, if I had to do a delete, what would change here? From this code, what would change? If I had to do a delete, what would change here? Yes.
Will we need to read? I mean, like,
The first thing is, what method will you need to change?
at
Here, of
delete
course, yeah. So instead of a get async, this would now change to a delete async, right? Now, does it return anything? The question I'm asking you is this: does it return anything? Does the delete return anything? Does their code return anything?
the object we deleted, employee object.
Right? So
Yes.
isn't this going to be similar to what we did in get? In get also, what are they doing? In get also, what are they doing?
Returning the
Returning
status and
an employee object. So depending upon what your API is returning, your code would vary accordingly. So let's look at the code for delete. And the first thing that you would change here was, of course, delete async. And delete employee number 5. That was my record. Okay. Now I have not, in this code, I have commented out the code which says what? Read the return value. I've commented out this, right? But I can very well print this out. So this should be giving me Vikram's record. If you're not going to be returning a value, then comment out this code. If that return OK was not returning an employee object, it just comment out this code. Let's try running this. So employee number 5, which was Vikram's record, is being deleted. All right, so successfully deleted, and Vikram 1, 2, 3. I had updated that value. How do I confirm whether it's gone? You can either check the database, that's one way, or simply here you could actually call get all and see whether that employee number 5, Vikram 1, 2, 3, whether it's still there or not. So you'll find that 1, 2, 3, 4, and then jumps to 9, and then the updates that we are having. Okay, what's going to change for the, let's say, post? Let's do post first. What's going to change for post?
The method will be put async.
Post async, right? And what else? Something else? So first thing is the method is post async. But along with that, what else would we need to also pass to it?
Employee object.
what contains
The
of
employee as JSON data. So here with post async, there's an option here which says first thing is, what is the URL that you want to call. The second is something called HTTP content, right? So the HTTP content is the actual content that your HTTP request would be sending. And to do that, I'm creating an object of type HTTP content, which contains a string content of EMP-SCR. So this is actually a JSON string. What is the encoding format and what is the type of data that you're actually sending? So that's the first part that I've done. All right. I've created a HTTP content and passing that out here. The URL didn't require anything else. It just took employees as a parameter. You didn't have to pass /1 or /2. If you're doing a put, what would change here again would be what?
Put async.
And what else with the put?
Employees and
The
So we
ID of
will
the
also have to pass the ID.
ID of the employee. All right. Okay. Now again, what does this return? What does this return? If you look at the post, what is it returning here in this case? It's just saying created, and then this is the employee details that are being returned out here. So if you'd like to, I've not done that. I'm just checking for whether status code is okay or not, right? Whether it's a success status code, then just printing success, otherwise error. Supposing I wanted to get the return value also, what is being returned from there, then how do you change that? How do you change that there? Yeah, this is what you need to do to get the return value from there. Are we clear on this, everybody? So this is what we are doing in here. I'm not printing it back again, but I'll just get this thing success or not. Now I don't have an employee number 10,000 in there, so hopefully this should work fine if everything else is okay. Right, so that gives you a success, immediate success. If you wanted to check the return values, just do a get all and get all would. I'll show you the last inserted record is employee number 10,000, who was Harsh. I'm going to make one more change out here, one more final listing, which is instead of calling a post, let's call a put. So similar to what we did in post, create the content, pass the content, but also pass the ID out here. So what has happened now? The name was Harsh. Harsh has been changed to changed value, right? And this is what I've done out here. Again, I'm not printing the return values, but either putting in success or error. Let's make this the startup and success here in this case. So if I try printing the values now again, right? The value was initially Harsh, and now that has been changed to the change value. So you'll find that if you're calling a web API, now this is one way of calling it. I'm calling it through code and actually creating a HTTP client class and sending a HTTP request and getting back a response. Have you all tried calling it through jQuery? Have you all tried creating an API and tried calling it through jQuery or something?
No, sir.
Okay, so I'm not going to show you that, but I wanted to tell you all that typically on most places, what you would typically do is your code, right, would send a AJAX request, get the code and update the values on that page itself. So I have an example for that, but that's
Sir, we have done that. Sorry, my bad.
Hmm.
We have done that.
Yeah, so that's exactly what I'm asking you to do. So you can try doing the same thing out here with the web API that you have created. Okay, and make the necessary changes. Of course, the initial web API that you might have been calling might have had a different structure. So change the values and try calling the same thing to jQuery code as well. Okay. Now, when you try calling it through, the same project. Okay. If you try calling it through the same project, and if you're calling this through jQuery code, it won't cause you any problems whatsoever. But if you try calling it from a different project, now a different project typically becomes a different website. Then in this case, you have a situation, something called as a cross origin, request that's coming in. Now, when you are working with cross origin requests, something called as CORS, all right, CORS, CORS, it would not, security permissions by default will not allow you to accept a request from a different website. So read up on CORS and figure out how you can allow requests that come in from other websites. So you have to do few configuration entries which says that, okay, other websites should be allowed or should not be allowed. And that is how you can enable or disable CORS. Okay. But that's all that I have for you in terms of creating a web API out here. You're going to do 2-3 things out here. First thing is you're going to, instead of just this code, instead of the code from the entity framework, you're going to create this. I mean, don't create students controller, you can create an employee controller and complete it with your own code. Then try calling it with the web API client, the way we called it, try calling it with Postman and see how that can work. All right. Then of course, do it with entity framework, and that simplifies your task for you of generating the code for this. I'm going to share my code for the client. Okay, so I don't expect you to write that code for the client. The only change that you'll need to do in there is change it to the ID that you have and then play around with the code. What if you're sending a response back, then how to find out the status code, how to display the object from there. So play around with that code. That's what I would expect you to do. Are we clear on this, everybody? All right. Let me show you one last thing if I can. Okay. So I'm not going to go much into details out here. But if I had to create a RESTful WCF service, I just wanted to show you this. So this is actually an example of a RESTful WCF service. This is the point I was making, that the binding that is being used is a web HTTP binding. All right. And by creating a web HTTP binding, you can actually create a service. Look at these services. We'll look at the methods out here. What are all
You are stuck. Hello, sir. You are not audible.
Connected. I got disconnected and I had joined back in. So yeah, but what I was actually trying to show you all here was this, that you can actually create a WCF RESTful service by specifying the binding as web HTTP binding. And this web HTTP binding is, if you see this, if you see these methods, can you figure out what these methods are doing? Is actually a get employee details, add new employee, update an employee, delete an employee. And this is actually being called when the post is being done, or a put is being done, or a delete is being done. So these same things that we did with Web API, similar code could have been actually been written with a WCF service as well. So that is what I was trying to point out earlier in the day, wherein you were looking at the different bindings. Why I'm pointing this out to you is, if you're going in for an interview, if you're being asked this in an exam, this is one of the questions that could be asked. If you say that you have, worked with RESTful services, how do you make a WCF service as a RESTful service? So this is one thing, and you can read up a little bit more on that. And as I said, I'm just taking an overview of what we are doing in WCF. We're not drilled down deep into each of these and tried it out. We'd have taken another, maybe a couple of days to do all of that. All right. So I'm at the end of the session for today. We are not taking anything further. It's been a little heavy session in terms of you, because you've had a long day already in any case. And to top it all, the topics that we looked at were not something that were really simple. How to create a WCF service, how to create a web API. But do try these out. These are important topics. If any of you are doing a .NET project, then this should be part of what you're showcasing in that project. If you're not doing a .NET project, if you're doing a web, JavaScript, Java project, for example, one of the components there, you can create it as a web API created in .NET, just to showcase your .NET skills, right? Anything that you want to ask me before we end this session?
It was not regarding the lecture, but I am getting a doubt in the assignment. Doubt as in like error in the assignment. Data SQL client exception. The name of the exception is data SQL client exception. When do we get that?
Data SQL client exception.
Yeah. Or
in
something.
What assignment? In which one?
The last assignment that I gave day before yesterday.
No, unless I look at the code, I'm not sure what could be the specific exception.
So I wanted to ask, if you have the time, can I show you the code?
I have the time, but people will throw something at you. So we can end the session for people who want to leave, and those who want to stay back and solve their doubts. Okay. Anuj is anyway saying today, why did I answer? I had to switch on my camera all the time. And now Kaustubh is asking doubts which are going to make us wait 10 minutes more. So I'll end the session. For those who want to leave for the day, can leave for the day. Those who want to wait back and see what the question is being asked are welcome to do so. Right. Yeah. Anyone else has any other doubts?
Sir, I just want to say the students to do the needful. I'm sharing one link. They need to fill this form before they leave.
All right. Please do what Nisha ma'am is asking you to do. Do that first, and Kaustubh, as soon as you're done, you can share your screen.
Yes, sir.
Aditya, any guidelines for CCEE for .NET? My suggestions would be, if you can be comfortable with the topics that we have covered in class, right? In terms of programmatically being comfortable with them, then the other part of it is more or less actually taken care of. But if you want to do any background reading, I've been saying this from day one, then refer to the ebook that has been given, and that background reading, can be the topics that are covered in the ebook. That was what my advice was to you on day one, and that has not changed in any way. All right.
This has to be. So I already have a data in the database. So I will just try to log in, and then it gives me an error. Like you said, if I click on remember me, then it should create the cookies and then log in. Yeah, this one.
Hold on. The parameterized query. Thank you. Just copy paste that into Notepad. No? It's easier to read.
Yes, sir. Just a second.
Just say copy details into Notepad. The parameterized query login name, select from expects the parameter login name which is not supplied. So this is fairly simple. You're calling some stored procedure, right?
No, sir. I have not made I have not made a stored procedure here.
What is CMD select doing? Okay.
Actually, the thing is we have to check for let's
Okay,
say
just don't stop running it. Click on the cross.
Okay.
Click on that cross with the error.
This one or this one?
Say the below one.
Yeah, okay.
And just show me what login name contains.
Basically,
No. Show me, put a mouse pointer line number 88. Or go right firstly. Just go right.
So I know it is taking null, but I don't know like why is it taking null, because
So
I
the
have
problem is
provided
not the query. The problem is why is it taking null?
Yeah,
So put a breakpoint on the previous code. So
okay.
Just put on login name. How did it get login name? Where are you calling this code from?
From employees customer, where I'm trying to do a login, right? So just a second.
So the problem is not the query. The problem is the value that you're sending in the login name. So that is where your debugging efforts should be.
So that's
Query
what
was
I'm.
okay.
Yeah, query is fine, and it was working a while back.
1 second. This is in the post of the login, right?
Yes, sir.
So show me the post of the login.
That's what I'm trying to figure out. Where is the login?
You're looking at the employee controller. Why is it called the employee controller?
Getting it. Okay, just a second, sir. I'll just stop this. Just a second. Yeah, maybe I was having some issue.
Okay, hold on. Now this is update register. Where's login? Login below, above.
That's what I'm saying. Right? No, it is above. This one. So in login get.
Hold on. Now I need to read also.
Yes, sir. Yes.
So that's the problem now. This is the get. No, it's not in the get. The problem is in the post.
Yeah. Okay.
Hold on. So you're calling what? You're calling line number 48. You're calling customers or login check. Is that what is causing a problem?
Yeah, I mean, it will have to check first if the login name and password that I have passed in, is it the correct
So
one?
is that the method that is giving a problem?
Yes, yes.
So that means your OBJ is obviously not coming in correctly.
That I got, sir, but why it is not coming? That's the
So
problem.
put a
Like, I don't-
breakpoint there. Let's see whether it's coming correctly or not.
Okay.
Put a breakpoint there.
Is it fine if I put it here?
Yeah.
And where do I put it?
No, run it now. Run it and see what is the value that's coming to it.
Okay.
And then we'll go one step back and then we'll see why it's not getting it. But at least first find out why is it not getting the value.
And right now, as I have already created the cookie while I was logging in the last time, the cookies are created. It was not deleted because I have not logged out. And because it is already created, it is like directly checking it. It is going in the get of login and then checking, like internally checking the cookies. For that, it is again seeing that login name is null and then it is giving the error. So I will have to comment out the login get code and then
Okay.
delete the
So
cookie. And
comment
then,
out the code which is doing the cookie check. Don't comment
Yes.
out the whole code. This is the code that is doing the cookie check. Okay, the whole thing is right. Okay. Yeah.
and yeah.
No, ignore that. Just it's come then it's okay. Ignore that. Ignore that.
I'll have to delete this cookie. Otherwise, the next time I include that code, it will again go do the same thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead, type out your login name and password.
Okay.
And click on login. Okay. Put your mouse pointer on OBJ. So it has got the login name and password, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now do F11, F11, go stepwise. F11.
Login check. Here it got.
F11, F11, F11.
Here also it is.
Okay. So just say okay. No. Yes, no, whatever. F11, F11.
So in that I will have to first. I'm
Now what
getting
is login name come as blank? It's come blank? No, it's got the
No, no.
login.
Yes, sir.
Okay. F11. Carry on. F11, 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 F11. F11. Carry on. F11. All this is going okay, no? Now what is login name here?
Yes.
Okay. F11, F11. Quick.
I also fetched the. Just a second, sir. There is a background voice.
So you got the values correctly here.
Yes, sir.
So now what? F11 again. F11, 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 F11. Carry on.
Here also we got this, and then.
So then where is the error coming? Where did the error come up?
That's what I'm saying. Like I have done this, but I'm not
Okay,
getting why.
F11.
Yeah.
Okay, F11.
This was. So why is it? Okay, no problem. It is creating a cookie then. First time it is working fine. Then I don't know.
So show me when it's getting a problem. No? Unless now I figure out why it's giving a problem, I can't give you the solution to it.
Correct. But then.
So stop running it, run it again and see what happens.
Okay. So the flow was if I comment.
No, I got the flow. I'm just saying identify when the exception is happening.
It is happening when I'm uncommenting this this code.
Go up.
Kaustubh, here is
Go
line
up,
number
go up,
37,
go
L is
up.
the capital.
Go up one. What happened?
Which is
Yeah,
capital?
Somebody's found an error. What is it?
I think, sir, that the login name and password, the spelling mistake is there. That is why it is taking obj.login name as null.
No, I didn't
That
get
is-
you.
He's saying somewhere you made a spelling mistake. Which line? Tell him line number.
I think that obj.cookies.values. Line number 29 and 30.
Okay.
Check with the previous one when you set the cookies.
It is the same one.
Okay, so show me the code now. What you're writing. Uncomment that code. Okay, now hold on. Let me check the code.
Yes, sir.
If cookie is not null, then new. Okay. Then read it from there. So this line number 32 was causing a problem, is it?
Yes, sir. Because
Then-
in login method, it was trying to fetch the customer, as in it with the login name. It is
No,
first
I'm
fetching
asking you which line gave you an error. Was it line number 32?
line number 32, but in the different method. Well,
Yeah,
when
I
it,
understood. In the login check method.
yeah, correct.
Okay, so put a breakpoint here on line number 32.
So, but the problem is, while I am logging in the first time, it is not going in this method, right?
It is going into this. Now, when you
For
go
the
into
first
the
time, for the first
when you
time,
go-
this cookie would be null, right?
if the cookie is null, okay. So it
First,
won't do
for the
any of
first,
that. It will show you the login page.
yeah, exactly. So we saw the login page, and when I entered the details and then clicked on login, then it gave me an error. So after put, it gave me an error. Sorry, post of login.
Okay, so just run this and see what is happening.
Okay.
Or do whatever you want to do and let's see where the error occurs. Do whatever, now you know what is happening when the error occurring. Do it and let's cause the error to happen.
Okay.
What happened? Kostur,
The
I
system
looked down, I looked up, it's suddenly gone.
the system was taking load just because of that one file. I mean, like, I don't know. I told you this just before, just at the starting of this lecture, that Zoom was getting disconnected because of it. Yeah.
So don't change anything now. Don't change
I'm
anything.
just
Let's see what the error is. When does this happen? Don't remove any cookie, don't remove anything. Just let's just run it and see what is happening.
So he's disconnected, I think.
Kostur is disconnected, is it?
Connection is stuck.
Okay. I'll wait, he'll join back.
Sir,
Yes,
can I ask a question?
yes, please.
Sir, how can we connect to a database that we have made in MySQL, not using the?
You'll have to download the MySQL, provider.
Okay. And
You'll have to download the MySQL provider.
and just that much is enough?
No, then use that in the code.
Okay, sir.
And then the, the connection the code that you write from the connection onwards would be similar, but the class that you use will be different.
Okay. Okay, sir.
Santosh had done that. Santosh, are you here? Is Santosh here?
No, I guess, sir.
Okay,
So which will be a
I'll
preferred
ask.
way?
David, do you
like-
know Santosh?
No, sir, I haven't spoken to him.
Okay,
I'll talk to him, sir. Yeah.
so just locate him. He's already got, because he had a problem
Yeah.
with SQL Server being installed. So he's done all the examples with MySQL.
Okay, sir.
So just
And
get
so which
help
is
on
a-
what you need to do in that.
Okay. Which is a preferred way, sir? Should we go with making database in MySQL and then connecting it, or do it the way you have taught us to do it?
Say that again. I missed the beginning of your question.
Like, what is a more preferred way, which will be a better way? Making the database in MySQL and then connecting it using the driver like you're saying, or the way that you have taught us, like make the table in the Visual Studio itself?
See, MySQL is a different database. SQL Server is a different database. .NET has more support for SQL Server because it being a Microsoft product. So generally, when you're working with .NET, the preferred database is SQL Server.
Okay, sir.
And SQL Server, what we used was the free SQL Server, which came installed with .NET. So when you install Visual Studio, it also installs SQL Server free copy with you. On a production level database, there is actual, SQL Server database that's available that you can connect to. The connection string obviously will change. Other things will remain the same.
Okay, sir. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry I missed what you're doing, Kaustubh. You got the error again?
Yeah, not exactly an error, but I am getting null in the customer here. But I have put in the correct login name and password.
So can you close the right-hand side diagnostic tools window?
This one?
Yeah.
Close it.
So that I can see the whole screen at one go.
Yeah, okay. So I'm getting
Hold on, 1 second.
null here.
So right now it will be null. No? When you go to the next line, it will read it.
Okay.
So it's got the values. Now what? Was it an error or you're just on a break mode?
No, sir. I'm just checking where exactly am I getting the error.